I'm Connor Wold, and welcome back to another episode of Wold's Oscar Countdown. And this week we are going to be doing a bonus episode today and tomorrow. This week, just giving my thoughts on the SAG Award nominations that came out today, as well as the Directors Guild Award nominations that came out today. Then tomorrow, I'm going to be giving my predictions for the Critics' Choice Awards in all of the categories. So it's going to be a very busy week this week on this channel. So if you do appreciate this video, subscribe to the channel, like the video. Those things help our channel grow. And then as always, I always appreciate if you comment down below and let me know your thoughts. Let me know what your predictions were. My predictions for SAG, even though I didn't put them on this channel, did do them on Gold Derby and ended up doing quite well in the top 2%, which is always something you like to see. And in this video, I'm just going to be giving my thoughts on the SAG Awards, the nominations, what they mean for the acting categories and the Best Picture category for the Oscars. And then at the end of this video, I'll be giving my thoughts on the directors and their nominations. So if you want to hear my thoughts about a certain category, look at the timestamps in the description below and you can jump ahead. I'm going to be looking at the ensemble category, the 4 acting categories, as well as a sort of summary of what we'll miss at the Oscars, sort of special segment that we'll do at the end. So feel free to stick around or jump through the video as you please. So starting off with my thoughts on the SAG Awards, looking at the Best Ensemble category. This is their sort of Best Picture equivalent. In many years, though, in recent years, we've seen this category really become less predictive of the Oscars because they really started to appreciate and reward the ensembles, which is why we see, movies like Green Book win Best Picture at the Oscars or Nomadland win Best Picture and not get nominated here just because those films don't have deep ensembles. It doesn't mean that they were unliked movies, it just means that the ensemble winner that doesn't necessarily always translate to the Best Picture winner, but they do give us an insight into the overall love for certain films, and sometimes your movie getting snubbed is actually the important factor as to the Best Picture race. So there's no real big surprises here except for something like maybe the Poor Things or the Holdovers. I had predicted Poor Things, didn't get that one in. And then The Color Purple getting nominated here was a good sign of support for its overall chances. I don't think it's going to get nominated for Best Picture because if you look at some of the other guilds, it's been actually disappointing. Some surprising misses there, but this nomination does indicate to me that the movie's not completely dead. It's not going to get a sole nomination for Danielle Brooks, but it's probably going to get a nomination for Danielle Brooks and then maybe, I think, one other technical award, but that's probably about it. Definitely a fall from grace from what I thought it would be earlier on in the season, but we have to adapt and change, and it looks like The Color Purple, despite getting nominated here, I still don't think it's going to get in for Best Picture, but still a bit of a sign of support. Then in the Best Actor category, there was one big surprise here, that being Leonardo DiCaprio missing out and sort of being replaced by Colman Domingo in Rustin. But I'm not too worried about this surprise, and I don't think that Leo's going to get snubbed at the Oscars. I still think Leo's going to get nominated at the Oscars with the other 4 nominees here at SAG. And I'm not worried because of multiple reasons. Number one, SAG always likes to do their own thing. If you look at the past 10 years, really, there's about an average of 14 out of the 20 nominations that they get wrong. So you have to expect some surprises. There are going to be some people that get nominated at SAG that don't get nominated at the Oscars. You just have to expect that. So there's going to be some people that you thought and still think are going to get nominated at the Oscars that won't get in here. So, number one, you have to realize that there's going to be surprises. Number two, they still like the film. SAG is a relevant awards body, and they still liked Killers of the Flower Moon. So it's not like there's a decrease in the support of that film, because they nominated Lily Gladstone and Robert De Niro and the film in Best Ensemble. So I'm not worried about the support of the movie. And then number three, the reason why I'm not worried is because the actor that sort of took his spot, I would say, would be Colman Domingo in Rustin. And Rustin is a Netflix movie, and the SAG Awards in the past few years have loved Netflix movies. I mean, heck, it's even being showcased on Netflix this year, broadcast on Netflix this year for the first time. Whether it be last year, you saw Adam Sandler get nominated and Eddie Redmayne get nominated, and those 2 guys didn't get nominated at the Oscars. If you look at some of the surprises in this year's nominees, they were from Nyad in Jodie Foster and Annette Bening, and that is also a Netflix movie. And then even if you want to look further back to that, Ruth Negga got in for Passing, another Netflix movie, got nominated at SAG, didn't get nominated at the Oscars. So they have a preference towards Netflix movies, I think, just because SAG is a huge awards voting body. So they've probably seen the movie that's easy to watch, accessibility, which is the Netflix movies. The one chink in Leo's armor would be that he's kind of the boring pick and that he gets nominated pretty much every time he does a movie, and maybe there's not enough passion for that. And the fact that it's not since 2013 since we've had 5 of the best actors also have their movie nominated for Best Picture. Usually there's a Brendan Fraser in The Whale or a Coleman Domingo in Rustin type where they really like the performance but they won't nominate the movie for Best Picture. But that's not a strong enough stat that will steer me away from not predicting Leonardo DiCaprio. But it is something to note that, his chances aren't guaranteed now because he missed out here. He is probably in the 4th, 5th slot being more vulnerable, whereas the other people who did get nominated at SAG and did get nominated at Critics' Choice, they're a little bit stronger in their chances of getting nominated for an Oscar. Then the Best Actress nominations, the only real surprise being Sandra Hüller getting nominated for Anatomy of a Fall, which I predicted and expected, so I wasn't too surprised by it, just because SAG do not like nominating performances that are not in the English language, whether it be Antonio Banderas for Pain and Glory, or Penelope Cruz in Parallel Mothers, or Yalitza Aparicio for Roma, or Isabelle Huppert for Elle. Those are all actors who did not get nominated at SAG and then went on to get nominated at the Oscars. Oh, and by the way, those are all 4 people who gave a performance not in the English language. So I'm not too worried about it, particularly because of how well Anatomy of a Fall did at the Golden Globes. I expect Sandra Hüller to get nominated for this category, but that still, a miss there is interesting to see. Then in the Best Supporting Actor category, the 2 big surprises being Mark Ruffalo in Poor Things not getting nominated and Charles Melton for May December. And I'm worried for one of them and I'm not worried for the other one. I'm not worried for Mark Ruffalo. I think Poor Things is a movie that will appeal to the more international branch of the Academy, and I think will do very well at an international award show that's also indicative of the Oscars being the BAFTAs. Now, we haven't gotten those nominations yet, but I expect Mark Ruffalo to get nominated there, and if he does get nominated there, then he gets nominated there, Golden Globes, Critics' Choice Awards, and that's enough for me to put it ultimately in my predictions, particularly because his movie is also really well liked. So I'm not really worried about Mark Ruffalo not getting a nomination. I think he'll probably replace Sterling K. Brown in American Fiction. But I am worried for Charles Melton because not only did he miss this nomination, he also did not make the long list at BAFTA, so he's not going to get nominated there. So that concerns me as well. So now you have an actor who is younger, and they don't like younger actors, in a movie where they don't really love. May December was totally blanked out, and it's also a Netflix movie, so there's really no excuse for not getting in here. So not getting in here, not getting in at BAFTA, sort of tells me that the Americans of SAG don't really like him, and the populist part of the Americans don't like him, but then also the international branch of the Academy won't show their support for him either, so who is going to vote for him? So I think at the end of the day, the way I was sort of thinking about it was, he's a younger actor, first of all, and when we look at the Oscars, they always go with the older actor over the younger actor. In this category in particular, they go with Judd Hirsch over Paul Dano in The Fabelmans. They go with Ciarán Hinds over Jamie Dornan in Belfast. Even in terms of winners, they went with Anthony Hopkins over Chadwick Boseman. They went with a Brendan Fraser over an Austin Butler. They always lean towards the older male actor, particularly in the male acting categories. So if it's Charles Melton or Willem Dafoe, well, Willem Dafoe is an actor who's been nominated many times, well liked. So you already have, the appreciation of that. Combine that with the fact that his movie is really well liked, and then you look at Charles Melton, who's not as well known to everybody, so he has to really give a great performance, which he does, but he's a guy who not a lot of people know, so they don't necessarily love him in the same way they love a Willem Dafoe. And his movie is clearly not as liked as something like Poor Things. So you have to ask yourself, is the Oscars going to nominate a performance that they may well like over an actor that's also giving a great performance, but the actor they really love and the movie that they're in they really love, versus Charles Melton, who has a performance that is great, but in a movie that they don't really love, and he's still a new actor, so he has to, ingratiate himself to a lot of these voters. That concerns me. I think this miss is a big loss for his campaign, and right now he is out of my predictions to get nominated for Best Supporting Actor, but the final nominations will stand when I release that video. Then in the Best Supporting Actress category, the only real surprise being, I think, Julianne Moore not getting in for May December. She did get in at the BAFTA long list, so I do think she actually will get nominated at the Oscars, but I'll be keeping an eye out on potentially a BAFTA nomination. But what kind of scares me about this 5 is that I actually really like this lineup of 5 supporting actresses, and I think that the Oscars could just repeat the SAG Awards and go 5 for 5 in this category. But, of course, some of these performances probably aren't going to get nominated at the Oscars, and that's what you have to keep in mind, too. So let's transition over into this segment of what misses here will hit at the Oscars. What movies and performances that didn't get nominated here will get nominated at the Oscars. Because, like I said at the top of the show, especially in the last 5 years, there's an average of 14 out of the 20 nominations that overlap with the Oscars. In another way, you have to say, well, there's going to be 6 performances, 5 or 6, that get nominated here that do not get nominated at the Oscars. So, what are those performances? First off, I said Colman Domingo. I don't think he's going to get nominated. I think it's going to be Leonardo DiCaprio in Killers of the Flower Moon. Annette Bening, I don't think she's going to get nominated. I think instead it's going to be Sandra Hüller for Anatomy of a Fall. That's 2. I said Mark Ruffalo, I think is going to get nominated instead of Sterling K. Brown in American Fiction. That's 3. But once you go 3, now you start to think, well, what else is there? I could go, Charles Melton is going to replace something like a Willem Dafoe nomination, but I'm not too confident in that. I actually don't think that's going to happen. And then I go, well, okay, Julianne Moore is probably going to replace either Jodie Foster or Penelope Cruz. Let's say Penelope Cruz. But then, that's 4. Okay, now I'm really pushing for the 5th, Now maybe I'm predicting America Ferrera instead of something like a Jodie Foster. There's going to be some surprise on Oscar night. We have to keep that in mind. Now, I'm not going to force myself to predict exactly, 15 out of the 20 or 14 out of the 20 overlap with the Oscars. Maybe this year they go 16 out of 20 or 17 out of 20, and most of these people get nominated at the Oscars. But you have to keep that in mind, because every time we look at BAFTA, we look at SAG, we look at Critics' Choice, then we get surprised when someone gets snubbed at the Oscars. But we have a consistent history now where SAG is pretty accurate, but there's usually about 4 to 6 every single year that miss. So when you're making your own predictions, hey, you may think, Annette Bening's getting in, but then Margot Robbie's not getting in, and that's who you're placing for Sandra Hüller. That's fine. I mean, make your own selection, but keep in mind when you're making your predictions to try to keep in mind that they're not going to go, 20 for 20 with SAG. They never have. Most of the time, they're 14 out of 20, 15 out of 20, so make sure that lines up with your own predictions when you finally make them come Oscar morning. And now, just talking about the Directors Guild and their nominations, their 5 lineup for Best Theatrical Film. They went with Greta Gerwig for Barbie, Alexander Payne for The Holdovers, Christopher Nolan for Oppenheimer, Yorgos Lanthimos for Poor Things, and then, of course, Martin Scorsese. And what's interesting about the Directors Guild, how they can help us predict the directing category at the Oscars, is that for the past 10 years, every year except for one, literally 4 out of the 5 directors who get nominated at DGA get nominated at the Oscars. And that's not an average of 4 out of the 5. That's not one year they overlap 3 of the directors, and the next year they get 5 for 5. Nope. 10 years in a row, every single year they went 4 for 5, 4 for 5, 4 for 5, except for 1 year where they went 3 for 5. So it's a pretty sort of basic kind of interesting Oscar rule where you look at the director's nominees and you go, okay, which one of these people will not get nominated at the Oscars, and which person will get nominated that wasn't nominated in this 5 at the Oscars. It's kind of a fun game to play. Now, looking at this 5, I may go off the deep end and say, actually only 3 out of the 5 will get nominated, because I do like Jonathan Glazer and I do like Justine Triet, but let's just be a little bit more conservative and let's say it's going to continue the pattern that it has for 9 out of the 10 years, being that 4 out of the 5 exactly overlap with the Oscars. So I think Martin Scorsese, Cillian Murphy, and Yorgos Lanthimos are pretty locked up, and really it's who are you going to take out? Greta Gerwig or Alexander Payne for The Holdovers? Now, Alexander Payne I think makes the most sense just because Greta Gerwig got in at Golden Globes, as well as Critics' Choice, where Alexander Payne only got in at Critics' Choice. He did not get nominated at the Golden Globes. I think that's slightly notable. He missed somewhere, so that's interesting. But when you actually look at the types of movies that do get nominated at the Directors Guild, that don't get nominated at the Oscars, they're generally more populist films. Top Gun Maverick, The Martian, American Sniper, sort of big box office hits that appeal to a lot of different types of people. Those are the types of movies that get nominated at DGA that don't get nominated at the Oscars. Even something like Denis Villeneuve for Dune. And when we look at this 5, Barbie is the box office queen. It is the most popular movie of the year. It is more like The Martian or Dune, these sort of box office blockbusters, Top Gun Maverick. So I am a little bit concerned that even though Greta Gerwig has gotten in everywhere, that she might miss out come the Oscars. But who knows? Maybe I'll go with 3 out of the 5 nominees and go with just Justine Triet and Jonathan Glazer in my 5. But right now, as it stands, I think I'd probably still go Yorgos Lanthimos, Martin Scorsese, Christopher Nolan, then probably we'll say Greta Gerwig for Barbie, and then my 5th slot, my international director, maybe Jonathan Glazer for The Zone of Interest, just because he's a little bit more well-known of a name than Justine Triet. But Anatomy of a Fall performing so well that, it really does show a sign of support for that movie. So it'll be interesting to see how that breaks down. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Let me know which director lineup you have right now, as well as what is your updated Oscar lineup for after SAG. Of course, we're going to have Critics' Choice Awards that happen and see those winners. But now that we have sort of the big acting nominations out of the way, I'd love to hear your thoughts and what you have in your predictions in your 5 and some of your reasoning. That's why I do these videos, to hear your guys' thoughts. But that's about it. Stay tuned to tomorrow, where I'm going to give my predictions for the Critics' Choice Awards. That will be a lot of fun, so subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.